Welcome to Season 2 of EdLab, a podcast of the University of Virginia School of Education and Human Development. I'm your host, Audrey Breen.
At its best, a classroom creates for kids the kind of world that we'd like for them to live in. It's not unmessy, but it's thoughtful, and it's empathetic, and it's humorous, and there are people in your corner when stuff goes well and when stuff doesn't go well, and it opens the world for so many different perspectives on a story or history or a piece of art, because the kids see and think about those things differently, so it's so much richer.
For those of us working in education, perhaps today's guest likely needs no introduction. Carol Ann Tomlinson, the William Clay Parrish Professor Emerita at the UVA School of Education and Human Development, is a world-renowned expert in differentiation, an idea that connects to how teachers see and teach each student in their class. In today's conversation, Carol shares her own definition of what differentiation means and how that definition has evolved a bit over time. After 21 years of K-12 teaching experience, during which she was named Virginia's Teacher of the Year, Carol transitioned into academia, investing in a generation of future teachers. Her scholarship generated hundreds of publications, including books that have now been translated into 14 languages. Though officially retired, Carol still works with educators across the U.S. and around the world. Looking back over her career, one principle reigns supreme for her when it comes to teaching: the power of human connection. Carol Tomlinson, I am so excited you're here. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity and appreciate the opportunities you've given so many of us to share what we're doing with a broader world. That you're a wonderful person to have in that way.
Oh, thank you, Carol. It's been a joy to know you for so many years. I was just telling you that I was rereading an article that I had written about your work close to around your retirement time. And I'm going to start with a question I already know the answer to because it's such a great one, which is, when you were growing up, what did you tell people when they asked, what did you want to do?
Well, I will preface that by saying that as a kid, I was an only child, and I had absolutely no self-concept, no identity whatsoever. So my friends might say, I'm going to be a doctor or I'm going to race cars. And I had no clue. I couldn't see myself in anything, but I could answer that question every time for a specific reason that I'll note in a minute. And so when people said, what are you going to do when you grow up? Which a lot of people do.
Yeah,
so I had time to practice the answer. My response was always quick and with big eyes: I will never be a teacher. And the reason for that was silly, but when we grow up, lots of things happen that are in different perspectives than the rest of the world sees them. I was very shy, grew up in a small elementary school, and when I was getting ready to go into sixth grade, my father changed jobs and moved from Charleston, South Carolina to Columbia, South Carolina. And if he had been moving to Mars, it would have been no less dramatic for me.
Gosh.
And the idea of going into a whole new school and seeing all those new people and starting all over was just traumatizing. It was total proof to me that they didn't care for me at all. And so that first year when we were in Columbia for the first time, I went to a normal-sized school, which was anything but normal for me, and I was in a normal-sized classroom. But I think my largest class in elementary school was 15 people. Normally, they were no larger than 12.
Right.
And so I'm in this class with 34 people, and I really thought that it was the whole school, or at least the whole sixth grade, and that we would, within a few days, we'd be subdivided.
Split up, yes.
And in that year, my mother was a librarian in that school. She'd been a math teacher and was a librarian in that school. And she was a good mother and not obtrusive in my life. But she'd say things at dinner that had no significance, but it said to me, she talked to you about somebody, about you with somebody today, or somebody mentioned you to her. And that was Big Brother in the room, the FBI living in the front of the house. It just was so invasive, and I just couldn't stand it. So at that point, I thought, well, I've eliminated one thing. And so anytime beginning in about mid-6th grade, all the way through high school, and even part of college, if people ask, I had no meaningful answer to give them except I will never be a teacher.
I will never be a teacher. And look at this magnificent career you have had in education. For those who are unaware, you are this world-renowned scholar whose work centers around this idea of differentiation. I would love to hear from you. How do you define differentiation, and for you, what is the magic behind it?
Well, I'm going to give you another little story. I'm bad with stories, so when you run out of time, just say it's been nice and we'll stop. But
stories are the best.
I declared that I would never be a teacher, and my first real job out of school was serving as advertising manager for Duke University Press, which sounds glamorous and wonderful. It was just so incredibly boring that I really got to the place of thinking if I have to go back one more day, it's going to be in a sack. And so one day I applied online in October for an ad in the newspaper. There were still newspapers then, and applied to be a teacher in a location that I had never heard of, Lemon Springs, North Carolina, and called the press and said, I'm not going to be back today, and went for the interview. And so I started working in a K-12 school in very rural North Carolina. To me, it was such a strange way of life, but of course, anytime you go into somebody's life and let them show it to you, it has its own logic and its own beauty and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I started there and knew instantly that I was born to teach. That year was so incredibly difficult, and I was such a bad teacher. But I knew from the beginning that that was it. That was really the charm.
Wow.
And my second vow was that if I ever did teach, which I was certainly not going to, I would never be a middle school teacher. And that was because 7th, 8th grade, 6th, 7th, 8th was the most miserable in my life with that move.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't going to teach, but if the world came to an end and I had to, it would not be there. So I then ended up teaching in Warrenton, Virginia, in a middle school, which was a junior high then, and taught 7th grade that year, first year, and ultimately taught 7th, 8th, and 9th. And so I could watch the kids grow up.
Oh, that's great.
And so my first teaching experience where my feet were on the ground at all was in that middle school. And we had what was known as, and still is, as a bimodal student population. About half of my students, and I was an English teacher, hired to teach reading, had never had a course in reading.
Oh, gosh.
Never had any courses in education, by the way. My first classes had a bimodal population where a little over half of our students in 7th grade were reading on a 2nd grade or 3rd grade level, some on a preschool or 1st grade level.
Wow.
And about half of my students were reading at or above a high school level.
Okay.
And in the middle, there was no it's not true to say nobody. There might be 5 kids in a class. We're sort of between those gaps.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about teaching. I had no preconceptions, but you couldn't do that for more than a couple of days and realize I can't teach this class as a whole. I just can't do it.
Right.
And so the idea of differentiation is really coming to grips with the reality of the students you teach. That was a pretty extreme reality, but understanding that in today's classrooms, the kids don't have the same cultures in their heritage. Some of them don't begin to speak the language of the classroom. Some of them come from large families, some from small. Some are interested in athletics. Some are interested in music. Some have no interest yet. Some are ready to go and get the world, and other kids are terrified of their own shadows. And some kids have experienced trauma, which we may or may not know about. And some kids go home to families that are the ones we'd wish for them. And some kids go to terrible places, which we might or might not know about. But just the logic of the classroom is you can't teach them as though they're all the same person that needs to learn the same stuff with the same entry points in the same way over the same length of time with the same support system. And we now know from neuroscience conclusively that each of those brains learns differently.
Yeah.
If we don't understand that, and if we don't come to grips with knowing them well enough to start kind of where they are, and then help them continue to move as far and as fast as they can, that we're going to fail a really lot of kids every year, and we're failing ourselves as well. So that really is not a quick picture, but sort of the big picture of differentiation. What do you do when the kids aren't alike? And by the way, they are not alike.
Yeah. So when a teacher is coming into their classroom and they begin to do this, what can happen in that classroom when that teacher is committed to teaching each one of those kids?
Yeah. It's really pretty dramatic. It's fascinating. Of course, anything in a classroom can go wrong. And if you're trying something that is dicey because you don't fully understand what to do, then some days don't go like you'd like to, and think maybe, well, I'll never try that thing again,
Right.
But if you can maintain that, you begin to realize that the most important thing in that room is human beings, not a test score, and that there is no single dictated curriculum that should be handed to you in a notebook and you're told to do exactly the same thing that the teacher next door does. You begin to realize that you are a much better teacher if you have 32 or 34 teaching partners working with you, if it belongs to them, and all of you are figuring this out together and you own it together. And that if you always have time to hear from them, and if you always have time to talk with them, you know them better and can therefore teach them better, it becomes the kind of thing to me that makes me understand that at its best, a classroom creates for kids the kind of world that we'd like for them to live in. It's not unmessy, but it's thoughtful, and it's empathetic, and it's humorous, and there are people in your corner when stuff goes well and when stuff doesn't go well. There should always then be adults that you feel like you can go talk to when you need to.
Yeah.
Ought to be that if the adult needs to talk with the kids seriously, the kids can handle that because you've developed that kind of, and it opens the world for so many different perspectives on a story or history or a piece of art, because the kids see and think about those things differently, so it's so much richer.
Right. That's such a beautiful picture. We, of course, prepare teachers here. We have students who come straight through undergraduate school to become teachers. We have, we're preparing teachers who are career switchers, who've done something first and then come into education. What advice would you give these students as they are beginning their teaching career?
Well, it's advice I'd like to give to them when they walk in this door for the first time here in this building. But
we can start there.
Learn about the kids. Learn about that. They're your humans. They're your people. They're your mission. I used to be fascinated here by how many students, because I taught a lot of those people you're talking about, different people coming into these classes just like different in a classroom, and they don't all need the same thing.
That's a great point.
Or learn the same way, although they all have the same human needs and tendencies.
Yeah.
But they would frequently come to me at the end of their time at this school and say, I can't wait to have my first job. I'm so excited. I'm going to create a classroom where every kid feels like they belong and where they can be a part of figuring out what to do, and they feel like they have a voice in the things. I just can't wait to do that. I'm so excited. And I would always say to them, that's a really wonderful aspiration to have as you go into teaching. Really, I think that's exactly the right way to be thinking about it. And what I never did say was, call me back in 3 years and let me know how it's going.
Yeah.
Because it's hard.
Yeah.
There are ways to make it less hard, but it's difficult. And there's so many pressures on you to not do any of those things. There's so many pressures on teachers not to pay attention to kids and not to do things that are interesting and not to be a real human being and not to have any allowance for somebody who steps in one direction or another. And even if your head is telling you that that's not who you want to be, the pressure is just almost insurmountable sometimes not to treat the test as the god of the endeavor, and not to believe that you're only a good teacher if you can cover all that material, which is ridiculous in a small amount of time. So I think it's kind of knowing what you want out of your own career.
Yeah.
And if it's covering a curriculum and saying I was the best test prep person that ever was, then go for it.
Yeah.
But if you are going into it with some sort of a hope or dream that's more human-oriented, stick with that dude.
Yeah.
And every night, stop and ask yourself, what did I do today that took me a step in that direction? And what am I seeing myself do that is sending me in a direction I never intended to go?
That is such a great way to put it, that it is almost a daily recalibration.
Hour by hour, yes.
What is a lesson that you have learned that has surprised you? Or a lesson that you've learned over your career that has been particularly meaningful for you?
Well, I'm beginning to sound like a broken record, but I think the power of human connections and having that be something that after a while just drives you, that you don't have to think about all the time. I'll give you an example from this school, and this was after I had taught in public school for 21 years at high school, preschool, and middle school levels, and I had been here quite a number of years. And I came into the building the first night of classes one night and got there really early, of course, to get the equipment set up because it's always my enemy. And I needed to make sure stuff was going to do something when I started.
Same.
And there was a young man who was already seated and had his notebook out and looked like he thought it was going to start in 3 seconds and he needed to be ready to take notes. So I introduced myself to him and said, I'm just here to get this stuff set up. If I get stuck, do you know anything about equipment? Can you help me any? And so we had a little bit of conversation. And then I've forgotten why, but maybe he got up to help me or I walked around to his desk for some reason. And I looked down and without any real thought, said, wow, those are really cool tennis shoes. I've never seen any just like that. I really do like those. Have to remember I grew up in a junior high school where tennis shoes were a big deal, but they were very cool tennis shoes.
Yeah.
So he was from another country. English was not his first language. He was nervous about things, and that was really our conversation that night. But probably 2 months later, he came to my office to talk with me about something, and when he left, he thanked me, and he said, you know, when I went home that first night of class, I told my wife, she's going to be a really good teacher because she told me I have cool tennis shoes.
I love that.
That's it. It's about the tennis shoes.
Connection.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's it. That's it with teaching. Do they think you see them and hear them and care about them and want to be with them and are willing to do some pretty strenuous stuff to make it work for them?
Yeah. I love that. We often talk about partnerships on the podcast. So much of the work that comes out of this school, well, I don't know, I don't like to use the word all, but the vast majority of the work we do is powered by, in connection with partners. What over your career have partnerships meant to you?
I'm probably going to look at that a little bit differently than you are now, because you're correct, of course, at a university. There have to be scholarly partners in other universities and across disciplines and community organizations you work with and professional organizations. And like most educators, I've worked with a lot of those things. But what has always made a defining difference for me was partnerships with colleagues in my own building. Oh. And the place that I taught in the middle school where I swore I'd never teach, I was there for 20 years. And in the beginning, there was only one other teacher who was teaching the content that I was trying to teach. And she and I were friends, and we applied for the jobs together and actually got one as team teachers. But within a couple of years, there were 2 or 3 more teachers teaching it, and then some more, and then some in other schools that would come in. And we met all the time. We had meetings, I think, every week for 10 years, and then every other week after that for 10 more years. When the ones of us were in the building, were constantly talking to each other. And when you find somebody who has the desire to succeed and really gets kind of a charge on thinking about that stuff.
Yeah.
And brings their perspectives to it. Teachers who are more mature, teachers who may be first-year teachers, but they've raised 2 children and see the whole world in a different way than the new teachers do.
Right.
That, to me, that power of working with dedicated teachers changes everything. And you mentioned before we started that it takes a long time for something like differentiation to become natural for you. But we never felt alone.
Yeah.
Because there was always somebody else that was invested in that. And we exchanged ideas all over the place and troubleshot together and found out that we weren't the only goofballs that couldn't make something work. So those have been always, I think, for me, the things that made my growth possible, which can then make the kids' growth possible.
Yeah, that's lovely. In some ways, Carol, hearing the decades of your experience and your work and your expertise return to this notion of human connection feels so simple and so profound, and yet one of the great challenges in all of our work, certainly for those in education. If we were having a conversation 10 years from now, what do you hope we would know in 10 years that we still don't know now?
Well, 10 years from now is going to change a really lot. It certainly will change me. I'm old already, and that's going to be way on up there if I'm still here. But I think, and there's so many unknowns coming with AI and ways that may or may not change the world, good things it'll do for us and things that will poison the water. But I think my great hope in teaching, people ask me sometimes why I don't give up. And I think it's because what's on the other side of giving up, the good side of not giving up, is what has to happen in schools for schools to work. And so I'm hopeful in 10 years that we get to that point of saying, I can't teach these kids as though they're all alike. I can know them, and I can be a champion for every one of them. But together we can really figure out lots of new ways to do things. And when it doesn't work, we can figure out how to make it better. One of the things you asked me how to define differentiation, and the core answer I gave you holds. I think the thing that is the hardest for me to deal with is that sense of lethargy in schools. It isn't negative. It doesn't necessarily mean doleful, and miserable, but just, okay, this is how we do this.
Yeah.
And for me, for a long time, when I was in that middle school place, and probably for a while, and definitely for a while when I came here to teach, if you had said to me, what is differentiation, I would have started in there somewhere about telling you it was an instructional model that helps you think through and reach kids instructionally in their own needs. But one more story, and then I promise I'll quit.
No, I love them. Keep them coming.
I was a young teacher from Fredericksburg called me many years ago. And she said, you haven't met me, but I have a job that nobody else in my school district has. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk with me. And she had been hired as a differentiation coach. I knew no differentiation coaches at that point.
Wow.
And she said, I'd just love it if I could come over and have lunch with you sometime. So she did, and it was a great conversation. You always learn more yourself than the other guy does. And so I'm thinking about, wow, look how different that job is structured, and look at all the pieces she's having to consider at once. And so she asked if she could keep coming back about once a month, and I said, absolutely. And she did, and I'm probably not giving you the right progression, but in this order makes some sense for how I work now. Came back one time, and she said, I don't think I'm doing my job. And I said, tell me what you mean. Well, I'm supposed to be coaching teachers on how to differentiate, inspiring them to do, helping them work in partnership with me. She was wise about what she was doing and not doing. But I have a couple of teachers who really don't know the curriculum they're trying to teach. And I don't know how to help them differentiate if they don't understand what it is that they're trying to differentiate. And so we talked about that, but I thought, that's a really good point. And I've seen myself in that situation. I've seen other people there. What she's saying is, I don't know how you can differentiate if you don't understand what you're trying to differentiate. In other words, differentiate curriculum.
Yeah.
If you don't know the curriculum. And then another time she'd come back and say, I don't think she ever saw the repetition in the pattern, by the way. I don't think I can differentiate, show these particular teachers how to differentiate, because I don't think they like kids. And if you don't like kids, I just don't know how to show you what to do next. And then another time she came back and she said, there are a couple of people that I'm working with, and she would always tell me good things that were happening, and these were not always the same teachers over and over, but they feel like they have to give kids a grade every day and grade everything that kids do, and I can't help them understand that formative assessment, which doesn't use grades in the foreground but sort of helps mentor kids, is better. They just think that's a waste of time. And I don't know how you can differentiate if you don't really understand the kid's progression of growth. So again, I'm thinking really good idea. And then one time she came back and she said, I have several teachers who have developed a really amazing understanding of differentiation as a concept. And if I were to ask them, how could you differentiate this lesson today to be on spot on for the kids in your class? They could say, well, I could do this, and this would work really nicely here, and I could do this with some kids while some other kids are doing this. And they could answer that perfectly, but they don't do it. And the reason is they're terrified of the loss of control. They feel like if they let go and they empower the kids to do things, chaos is going to break out, and they'll be back to feeling like their first year is teaching, and they just can't make themselves go there. So what I realized was I had seen differentiation as just an instructional model, but the environment has to be right, and the curriculum has to be meaningful.
Right.
And our assessment practices need to be what John Hattie calls invitational. All those things need to be invitational. And we need to understand how to lead kids and orchestrate all that stuff. And we also need to know what to do with the instructional piece, which is where I'd been coming from. What was interesting about that is my colleagues and I had figured out those elements and working with them. And so we kept falling in pits and getting up and brushing off the mud and starting again.
Yeah.
But we understood to make the curriculum relevant for kids, and we had understood that the environment was everything, and that we needed to do something that didn't have them frozen in their seats with assessment.
Yep. And
from day one, to figure out how to empower them to help us make different things happen in the classroom. So 100 years from now, if I can come back and sit as a fly on somebody's classroom wall, I'd like to think that we have gotten that notion that the foundation for everything we want is high-quality teaching. Mm-hmm. And if any element is missing, then all the others are impeded. And I'd like to think we were all there trying to be really good practitioners of all of the aspects of the classroom. Like a really good architect doesn't just look at the screws or the drafting tools he's using. You have to get that whole environment thing going. I hope we'll get there someday, that understanding that high-quality teaching is... If that's our goal and we strive for that through our careers, we'll do amazing things.
Yeah. Well, I am so grateful that you are here. I'm grateful for the time that you have spent, and mostly I'm grateful for your friendship.
Same back to you, that last one especially.
And for the life that you have shared with us, and the work that you have done that you are sharing with so many. We're all better for it. So thank you, Carol.
And I am, and it's a great privilege, and thank you for this opportunity too.
Thank you, Carol. EdLab is a production of the University of Virginia School of Education and Human Development and WTJU 91.1 FM. EdLab is produced and hosted by Audrey Breen. Our music is Palms Down by Blue Dot Sessions. You can subscribe to EdLab wherever you get your favorite podcasts.